The Cretaceous, a world trembling under the feet of giants. Every breath of wind carried the scent of resin and ash. Ferns rose taller than men, cicads fanned their waxy leaves beneath a golden haze, and dragonflies the size of ravens drifted through the warm, heavy air. The continents were still wandering, colliding, tearing apart, their edges bleeding into shallow seas. Volcanoes stitched the horizon, pouring fire into water, birthing islands where none had been before. It was an age when Earth was restless and alive. Dinosaurs ruled this lush theatre. In the forests, herds of hadrosaurs murmured among the trees. In the clearings, tyrannosaurs stalked with thunder in their ribs. Above them, the sky shimmered with the slow ballet of pterosaurs, wings like veils of silk catching the sun's heat. And yet, beneath all that noise, beneath the roots and the fallen logs, something quieter was stirring. Among the shadows, small lizards moved differently. Their bodies elongated, their limbs softened, their hips began to whisper the first notes of disappearance. It did not happen in a single birth, or even a single lifetime. It was a story written across millions of sunsets, scales replacing claws, motion replacing form. In the stillness between epochs, the earth exhaled, and the first snakes began to glide. They were not yet the creatures we know. They were half memory, half invention, slipping through damp soil and moss, feeling the world with their bellies instead of their feet. Their bones still remembered walking, but the ground beneath them no longer needed footprints. They had found a new way to move, a movement of sense, of surrender, of the flow. The Cretaceous sun burned high above, painting rivers with molten gold. In that endless summer, survival demanded adaptation, and those who could bend without breaking endured. Snakes were born not from rebellion, but from stillness, from listening to the pulse of the planet and learning to move in rhythm with it. Welcome, the narrator whispers, to Dark Ages Unveiled, where the past moves slowly and curiosity drifts like smoke. Tonight, we follow the serpent's beginning, a story written in dust, silence, and time. In the southern deserts of ancient Patagonia, where the wind still sings through stone and memory, there once lay a creature unlike any other. Beneath a sky streaked with volcanic smoke, between dunes that shimmered like molten glass, it moved. A shadow neither lizard nor snake, both old and new, as if time itself had hesitated while shaping it. Its name, given by those who found its bones millions of years later, was Najash Rionegrina. 95 million years old, it was the first whisper that the serpent's body once bore legs. Imagine that land. There were no Andes yet, no grasslands, no cold breath from the south. The continent of Gondwana still fractured slowly, each crack a sigh that would one day become oceans. The air was heavy with heat and dust. Cicadas and conifers stretched across the horizon like armies of green spears, and the sand held the footprints of creatures long vanished, small mammals darting between roots, dinosaurs grazing under low sun, insects glinting like shards of copper. And among them, beneath the roots of ancient trees, the ground stirred. Najash pushed forward, not with steps, but with waves that began at its head and rippled down the spine. Yet from its sides, just above the curve of its belly, protruded two delicate limbs, remnants of a world it had already left behind. Tiny bones, each one carved with precision, fragile yet certain, like signatures of a memory that refused to be erased. Evolution had begun to write in whispers, and Najash was its poem. It was not large, perhaps a metre or two, but it carried the dignity of a pioneer. Its skull, broad and angular, revealed fangs that could pierce the soft bodies of small prey. The sands of Patagonia were its hunting ground, dry riverbeds, shallow burrows, nests abandoned by lizards. Najash could slither, could burrow, and when the wind died, it could climb low roots to watch the world move around it. In those moments, when everything fell silent except the hum of heat, its flickering tongue seemed to taste not just scent, but time itself. Its legs, small and useless to our eyes, were not mistakes. They were echoes of something still in transition, a reminder that change does not erase, it transforms. Najash carried the blueprint of walking within its very ribs. Each vertebra was an essay in adaptation, elongated yet familiar. Its hips, though reduced, were still sturdy enough to anchor movement. Scientists would one day look at these bones and see proof that snakes were not born from the sea, as once thought, but from the land, from lizards that learned to surrender their limbs in exchange for grace. If one could sit beside Najash in that burning desert, one might not have recognized its significance. It was small, unassuming, its scales dulled by dust. But evolution hides its revolutions in silence. The grand changes are not shouted. They are whispered, buried and forgotten until someone digs them up again millions of years later. When paleontologists uncovered Najash's fossil in the early 2000s, they found not just bones, but revelation. It was discovered in Argentina's Rio Negro province, a place of rut cliff orphers and fossilized dunes, where ancient life sleeps in rock like dreams inside amber. The fossil was nearly complete, astonishingly preserved. Its skull showed a movable jaw, capable of swallowing prey larger than its head, the beginning of a trait that would one day define snakes. And yet, behind that skull the pelvis remained, intact, jointed, unmistakably terrestrial. Najash, in its quiet way, bridged two worlds. Before Najash, scientists debated whether snakes came from the sea or from the soil. Some imagined they evolved from marine reptiles like mosasaurs, which also bore flexible jaws. Others believed they descended from burrowing lizards. Najash ended that argument not with noise, but with evidence. It proved that snakes began their story on land, that their ancestors slithered not through salt water, but through dust and roots, tasting the breath of earth rather than waves. The name itself carries a ghost. Najash comes from the Hebrew word for serpent, echoing the one from the Garden of Eden, the being that crawled on its belly after losing its legs. How strange, then, that this ancient fossil should bear both snake and limb, as if to remind us that myth and science sometimes meet at the same crossroad. The serpent that still walked, a creature halfway between punishment and possibility. Najash lived during the late Cretaceous, when the world was warmer, wetter, and wilder than now. The deserts of Patagonia were not barren but teeming with hidden life. Small mammals, feathered dinosaurs, primitive birds, all coexisted under a sun that never seemed to rest. Najash hunted among them, gliding across cracked clay, its scales glinting like dull bronze. It could burrow into cool soil when the day grew unbearable. It could wait, perfectly still, for hours. Patience was its weapon, silence its camouflage. The wind carried sand that whispered across its scales, polishing them into patterns that shimmered faintly at dusk. When it struck, it did not rush. It coiled, felt the tremor, and moved with precision. Not a predator of chaos, but of rhythm. In Najash, motion had become language. Every curve of its spine spoke of adaptation, every ripple a decision carved by survival. To look at it now, through the lens of time, is to see a being that existed on the threshold of becoming. Its fossils tell a story of slowness, of a body negotiating with the world, trading limbs for flexibility, structure for flow. Each generation gave up a little more of the old and embraced a little more of the new, until one day the legs would vanish completely, and movement would no longer need steps at all. Perhaps there is something almost spiritual in that. The shedding of limbs, the surrender to the earth, the learning to move by yielding instead of resisting. Evolution is often painted as a struggle, a competition, but in the shape of Najash, one might see a different kind of progress, one that comes through listening, through patience, through letting go. In the deserts where it once lived, the silence is deep. Even today, when the wind blows, it hums faintly between the rocks, as if carrying an old rhythm bow, the slow pulse of something sliding just beneath the surface. Najash is gone, yet the idea of it lingers. Its descendants carried forward what it began, a body built not for standing tall, but for flowing unseen. When its fossilized skeleton was exposed to sunlight after 95 million years, it was as though the earth itself exhaled a secret. Scientists brushed away grains of red sand and touched history. There, in stone, were the hips of a creature that had once stood and the ribs of one that had learned to glide. Evolution had left a signature not of perfection, but of transition. In life, Najash might have hidden from the thunder of dinosaurs, weaving through their footprints after the storms. Perhaps it watched shadows pass overhead, the beating wings of pterosaurs, the slow tread of herbivores. Perhaps it felt the tremor of their steps through its jaw, the vibration of power and danger. And perhaps, in its quiet way, It adapted not by fighting those giants, but by slipping between their moments, learning to exist in the spaces no one else occupied. It did not dominate. It endured. It did not conquer. It adapted. And because of that, it survived longer than the titans around it. Every ripple in its body carried that philosophy, the art of bending rather than breaking. The sandstorms came and went, climates shifted, continents drifted, and Najash's lineage continued. When the Great Extinction arrived at the end of the Cretaceous, the legacy of movement it had begun allowed others to survive underground, coiled in patience while the sky burned. To think of Najash is to think of humility within power. Its strength was quiet, its revolution invisible. It changed the course of evolution not through might, but through subtlety, through the slow unlearning of what had once been essential. Legs that had once lifted became unnecessary. Walking gave way to flowing. The earth itself became the medium of its existence. The fossil of Najash is not merely an object of stone, it is a symbol of continuity. It reminds us that all transformation carries traces of the past. Just as a melody lingers in the air after the instrument falls silent, so too do those ancient limbs remain inside every snake that moves today. Vestigial bones hidden deep within, unseen but undeniable, reminders that even evolution remembers. In museums now, Najash rests behind glass, its bones arranged in the delicate posture of eternity. Children press their faces to the display, seeing nothing more than a skeleton, but if they listen closely, perhaps they might hear the faint hum of sand, the breath of wind, the heartbeat of a desert where something first learned to glide. For within every snake alive today, from the boa in the rainforest to the viper in the dunes, there is an echo of Najash's motion, the rhythm of that first decision to move without legs, to trust the earth completely. There is a strange comfort in that continuity, that even as species vanish and empires of biology rise and fall, the essence of movement persists, transformed, refined, but never lost. Najash, the serpent that still walked, stands as a bridge between what was and what could be. Its story tells us that progress is not the erasure of history, but its transformation into something new. And somewhere deep beneath the sands of Patagonia, the bones of others like it still sleep. Layers of time settle over them, each grain of dust a heartbeat. The earth remembers everything. It remembers the heat, the breath, the moment when legs first began to disappear. It remembers the shape of silence learning to move. And though the world above has changed beyond recognition, oceans rising, continents drifting, species blooming and fading, that memory remains undisturbed. Patient. Eternal. Najash was not the first snake, nor was it the last of its kind, but it was the first to speak the language of transformation clearly enough for us to hear. Its existence stitched together myth and science, earth and story, time and breath. It told us that the beginning of every serpent was not in sin, nor in punishment, but in adaptation, in the quiet, sacred decision to flow instead of fight. When you imagine it now, the desert shimmering, the horizon trembling with heat, see it there, half buried in shadow, its small limbs pressing against sand as it moves forward with purpose. Not fast, not fierce, but inevitable. A movement so ancient it feels like prayer. And as night falls over the fossil fields of Patagonia, and the wind hums across the dunes, it is almost possible to believe that something still moves there. Something small, patient, and endless, carrying the memory of walking and the wisdom of letting go. Long before the first human hand touched water and called it holy, there was a sea that shimmered like liquid light. Its name was Tethys, an ocean stretched between continents not yet finished, a cradle of warmth and creation that lapped against the coasts of what would one day become North Africa, the Middle East, and southern Europe. Here, under skies the colour of copper and rose, evolution rehearsed its miracles in silence. The Tethys was not a calm sea. It breathed heat and salt, and its tides whispered of change. It was in this vast and luminous womb that snakes learned to swim. The fossils of Cretaceous and Hasiophis were found not in the sea itself, but in the limestone of ancient Lebanon, stone once submerged beneath the shallow lagoons of Tethys. To look at them is to see two beings caught mid-transformation, their bodies stretched and sinuous, their ribs fused with density, their tails thickened for the art of gliding through water. Yet curiously each still bore a pair of hind legs, small, useless, but there, like punctuation marks left in a sentence evolution was still writing. Imagine that sea as it once was, clear as melted glass, warm as blood. Coral reefs spread like cathedrals, teeming with ammonites spiralling in slow elegance. Schools of fish darted through sunbeams that split the surface into trembling mosaics of gold. Soft-bodied creatures, now long extinct, floated like pieces of translucent silk. And somewhere in that gentle chaos, a shape appeared, smooth, deliberate, curving like some cut through water. It was not a fish nor an eel. It was something older, something that remembered land but no longer needed it. Pakyarachis moved as if the sea itself had lent it rhythm. Unlike Najash, Pakyarachis did not crawl through dust. Its world was fluid and forgiving. It glided with a muscular grace, ribs pressing against the current, scales catching light like mirrors. It could dive, turn and rise without a ripple. But look closely, and the faint outlines of tiny legs can still be seen beneath the tail, the last ghost of a land-dwelling ancestor. Its bones were heavy, thick with minerals, a condition called pachyostosis, giving weight for balance in the buoyant world of the sea. That heaviness, that density kept it from floating aimlessly. Even in surrender, it carried gravity. Harsiophis, its close relative, shared this strange duality. Both creatures swam not as conquerors but as guests, quiet observers of a realm that had existed long before them. They were amphibious in spirit if not in form, slipping between shore and sea with the poise of things that belonged to both and to neither. Perhaps they hunted small fish, crustaceans or squid, their jaws already capable of the wide gaping that would define future serpents. When they fed, the ocean floor stirred with dust, the soft echo of ancient hunger. The sea around them was ancient, older than any mountain we know. Its waters held the memory of Pangaea's breakup, of the continents drifting apart like sleeping giants shifting in their beds. Through its heart pulsed warmth, tropical, slow, relentless. It was a place of creation and of burial, where species rose and vanished in the same tide. To the casual eye, it was paradise. To the patient eye, it was the slow theatre of extinction. Yet in this rhythm of birth and death, snakes found freedom. What Pakyarachis and Harsiophis reveal is that the snake story is not linear. It is not a ladder climbing upward, but a spiral, looping, hesitating, experimenting. While some, like Najash, remained on land, others slipped into the water to rediscover motion in a different form. The earth was their cradle, the sea their mirror. Evolution was not in a hurry. It sculpted, erased, and sculpted again. The legs of these serpents lingered not out of necessity, but out of memory, a biological echo that refused to quiet immediately. To the modern eye, it might seem curious that a snake would ever need legs beneath the sea, but the truth lies in patience. When the body changes, the spirit of it, the code, the rhythm, the ancestral music, takes longer to fade. The legs were vestiges of a song that the ocean was slowly learning to forget. Each limb, each bone, each fragile curve was like a faint whisper. We once walked. Yet in the liquid blue of Tethys, that whisper drowned beautifully. The discovery of Pakyarachis was almost accidental. In the 90s, when scientists uncovered its remains near Ein Yabrud in Israel, they saw something that defied classification. The fossil was complete. Ribs, vertebrae, skull, and astonishingly, hind limbs. For decades, textbooks had told the story of snakes evolving from burrowing lizards. This fossil seemed to tell another tale, of serpents born from the sea. It reignited the ancient debate, but like the sea itself, truth is layered. It would take more findings, more patience, and the quiet persistence of paleontology to understand that both tales could be true. Some snakes may have learned to glide through soil, others through waves. Evolution is a story of variations, not absolutes. In the calm shallows of Tethys, Harsiophis swam nearby, its own skeleton nearly identical to that of Pakyarachis. Its bones suggested an even stronger adaptation to water. Perhaps it lived further offshore, drifting among reefs that bloomed and withered with the tides. Its heavy ribs acted as ballast, letting it move with steady grace beneath the surface, never rushing, never rising too quickly. To exist in the ocean's embrace is to learn humility, to feel one's weight dissolved and one's direction dictated by unseen currents. These snakes, small though they were, carried that humility in their design. There is beauty in imagining them alive. the slow shimmer of their bodies as they swam through sunlight, their tongues flicking not at air, but at salt and current, reading invisible trails of prey. Around them, schools of fish scattered in silver bursts. Far above, waves folded upon themselves, tracing circles of eternity. In those moments, the sea might have seemed endless, time suspended, and within that timeless blue, a question moved. Would life ever return to land, or was this the final surrender? For millions of years, these serpents thrived. Their kind explored the margins of continents, following coastlines, nesting in the quiet safety of lagoons. But as the Cretaceous world changed, as climates shifted and sea levels rose and fell, their home began to disappear. The Tethys shrank. What was once ocean became desert, then stone. The reefs died, the corals turned to fossils, and the serpents of salt gave way to serpents of soil once more. Yet something of the sea stayed with them. The fluidity of their motion, the calm of their strike, the reflective gleam in their eyes. The ocean had not made them different. It had reminded them of who they were meant to be. It is difficult to imagine extinction while standing before the sea. Its vastness deceives us into thinking it is eternal. But even the greatest oceans vanish given the time. The Tethys withdrew slowly, its shores turning into sand, its bed becoming limestone. And within that limestone the bones of Cretaceous and Hasiophis were sealed, sleeping through epochs, wrapped in sediment, their silence unbroken. When the Mediterranean eventually took its place, it carried their ghosts in its salt. Every wave that touches the coast of Lebanon today still holds a fragment of that ancient warmth. What is remarkable about these fossils is not just what they reveal about evolution, but what they say about endurance. In a world of titanic reptiles, mosasaurs, plesiosaurs, ichthyosaurs, these early snakes survived by choosing subtlety over size. They were never apex predators, never monsters. They thrived in the spaces others ignored, in lagoons too shallow for giants, in tides too soft for teeth. Their strength lay not in domination, but in presence. Theirs was the quiet power of persistence, the same power that would one day allow their descendants to outlive nearly everything that shared their age. To study Cretaceous is to feel the intimacy of motion. His vertebrae curve like a line of poetry. Each rib articulates the rhythm of a world in flux. There is a tenderness in its design, as though evolution had learned to sculpt with empathy. No violence, no haste, only adaptation born of need. The legs remained, not because they were strong, but because they were kind remnants, held on to a little longer before the tide of time took them away. Perhaps that is why the image of a snake with legs feels strangely human. It reminds us of ourselves, creatures caught between what we were and what we will be, unable to let go completely, yet always moving forward. The serpent story is our story, the endless negotiation between past and possibility. To evolve is to grieve a little, to lose parts of ourselves we no longer need, and to find beauty in what replaces them. Even now, when the evening sun falls over the Mediterranean, the light deepens into that same copper hue that once painted the Tethys Sea. The wind carries salt. The waves murmur against ancient cliffs that once formed its shores. Somewhere beneath, buried deep in the limestone, lie the bones of the first serpents who swam. They rest in layers of stillness, patient, eternal, awaiting the gentle curiosity of those who will find them. When uncovered, they will once again teach us the language of transformation, the art of flowing through change without fear. The ocean remembers everything. It remembers the glimmer of scales beneath sunlit ripples, the first curve of a body learning to trust water, the hush that follows adaptation. It remembers how Cretaceous breathed for the last time before silt covered it, how Hasiophis drifted downward into the calm dark, how their bones hardened into story. And perhaps, in the quietest depths of the Mediterranean, where sunlight no longer reaches, something of that memory still moves, not as flesh, not as spirit, but as vibration. The rhythm of the first serpents, the hum of persistence itself. In the end, the call of the Tethys Sea was not a summons to drown, but an invitation to transform. It was the sea that taught snakes to flow, to yield, to move with rather than against. It gave them weight to anchor their grace, silence to balance their hunger, and a vastness to measure their humility. When the sea finally withdrew, it left behind not fossils but philosophy, the truth that to survive one must learn to move with the current, not against it. And so the story of the serpent deepened. From dust to water, from roots to reefs, from footsteps to ripples, the sea had finished its lesson, and the earth waited for their return. The next chapter would no longer be written in coral and limestone, but in soil and stone. For beneath the deserts of Patagonia, another serpent was already listening to the heartbeat of the ground, preparing to inherit the silence that would one day rule the world. There are fossils that seem to breathe, even after 60 million centuries. They rest in stone as if asleep, their curves too delicate for coincidence, their posture too elegant for mere anatomy. Eupodophis descuensi is one of those. Found in the Cretaceous limestone of Lebanon, within the same ancient sediments that once bordered the Tethys Sea, it was a snake caught between water and air, memory and motion, evolution and art. Its discovery was not a triumph of excavation, but a moment of revelation, a whisper from the sea itself, reminding us that beauty sometimes survives extinction. The stone that held Eupodophis was once seabed, a bed of soft, creamy mud where dying fish, drifting leaves and tiny marine creatures settled after every tide. Each layer thickened like a page of a slow, unfinished book. When the creature died, its body sank gently into that silence. Over time, sediment pressed against it, the weight of millennia turning flesh to mineral, motion to memory. When scientists split open the rock millions of years later, they found its entire form, curved like a brushstroke, the body long and fluid, the tail thickened for swimming. But beneath that graceful shape, they saw something few expected, a pair of small, perfect legs. They were not symbolic traces like those of Pachyrachis, not vague suggestions of what once was. They were real bones, a tiny femur and tibia, each jointed, complete though forever still. Evolution had not yet finished its experiment. The limbs were halfway gone, like words fading from an old language. Yet they remained visible, reminders that transformation is never clean. Nature edits itself in drafts. In Eupodophis you can see the poetry of indecision. Its body was built for water, for the slow ballet of tides, but those legs beneath its scales spoke of a time when its ancestors clung to the land. It swam not like a fish, but like a dancer tracing arcs in invisible air, muscles shifting in ripples, each motion deliberate, elegant, quiet. It lived in lagoons that shimmered with coral dust and sunlight, a place where water met sky in endless reflection. And in that shallow sea, it became a symbol of all that life could be when it stopped resisting change. The name Eupodophis descuensi comes from the Greek eu, good or true, podo, foot, and ophis, snake. The good-footed serpent. It almost sounds like a paradox, or perhaps a joke from evolution itself, but there is no mockery in its design, only the quiet intelligence of a world still finding balance between opposites. Its form embodied compromise, not quite terrestrial, not fully aquatic, a living meditation on adaptation. Its bones, when scanned by synchrotron imaging, revealed more than Teuton structure. They revealed hesitation. Each vertebra elongated, each rib bent with precision, yet the hind limbs lingered, attached but no longer functional. They were sculpted not for use but for remembrance. The fossil showed how evolution doesn't leap. It wades through uncertainty, testing every path before choosing one. And sometimes it leaves behind ghosts in the body, signatures of what once worked, now folded into new designs. Imagine it alive, sliding through the clear waters of Cretaceous Lebanon. The sea was calm, almost tropical, filled with drifting plankton and small fish glittering in ribbons of light. Giant turtles passed overhead like shadows of ancient continents. In the distance, the calls of primitive seabirds echoed over waves. Eupodophis moved quietly beneath it all, unseen but ever aware. It did not hunt with ferocity, but with rhythm. Its tongue, forked and sensitive, read vibrations in the water. Its skin shimmered with bronze reflections. It was both participant and observer in the ocean's slow symphony. Unlike Pachyrachis, its legs were not dense with bone. They had grown delicate, almost translucent, fragile like paper beneath the skin. The sea had no need for them. The body had learned a better way. Still they remained, perhaps for balance, perhaps for nothing more than memory, a trace of the old world carried forward into the new. The Tethys Sea was shrinking, but it still hummed with creation. Its shores were alive with cicads and mangroves, its depths crowded with ammonites and fish. It was a theatre of adaptation, every creature rehearsing new ways to exist. And within that chorus, Eupodophis swam as a kind of lyric, the embodiment of surrender without loss, of transformation without haste. It did not need to dominate. Its purpose was subtler. It existed to show that nature could flow like music. The fossil record rarely preserves softness, but in Eupodophis, one can almost sense the texture of skin, the faint shimmer of life before it faded. Its ribs, curved and endless, form a pattern like breath held mid-exhale. The tail narrows into a delicate taper, an unfinished sentence. The legs, tucked beneath the body, resemble hands folded in prayer. Even in stone it feels alive. When the scientists of the early 2000s uncovered it, they realized they were holding one of evolution's transitional masterpieces. Here was a being that had chosen water, yet carried the memory of land within its bones. A creature suspended between epochs, bearing the same hesitation that exists in all living things, the fear of letting go, the beauty of learning to. Some say Eupodophis marks the moment when snakes became truly serpentine, when motion replaced structure entirely. But to say that misses the tenderness of its design. It was not about abandoning the past, it was about carrying it forward in new form. To glide through water without legs required faith in the medium itself, trust in the unseen. It had to believe in motion, to surrender control, to let the body become its own vessel. Perhaps that is why Eupodophis feels less like an animal and more like an idea, a reminder that change is not a rupture but a rhythm. Its small limbs, useless yet unforgotten, are like relics of a dream, proving that the past never truly dies. It transforms, softens, hides beneath the surface, waiting to be remembered. In life, Eupodophis must have known both light and shadow. During the day, it swam in the glowing shallows where sunlight fractured into gold. At dusk, it slipped into cooler depths where the sea turned green and quiet. At night, when the moon hung low and the water reflected its pale fire, it drifted motionless near coral beds, its breathing slow, its body curved into perfect stillness. There, in the dark hush of prehistory, a thought seemed to form, not in words, but in the rhythm of the tide, that survival was not about dominance but harmony. When the sea finally took it, the death was gentle. No predator, no storm, just the slow settling of silt, the closing of light, the silence that turns all living things into stories. And the stone that formed around it held that silence perfectly. Every line of its body became scripture, every bone a syllable in the long, patient language of the earth. Today, when the fossil is placed under light, it gleams faintly, as if something inside still remembers water. Scientists trace their fingers along its shape, marveling at the legs, the curve, the elegance. But the stone does not answer. It has already spoken, in the way of all ancient things that do not need voices to be heard. To study Eupodophis is to understand that evolution is not ruthless. It is lyrical. It composes over eras, layering melodies of bone and muscle, rhythm and repose. Where we see imperfection, nature sees continuity. Where we see vestigial remnants, it sees memory. Eupodophis was not a mistake. It was a stanza in the world's longest poem, a verse written in salt and bone, recited in the language of waves. In its world, the great reptiles still ruled the deep. Mosasaurs hunted like shadows. Plesiosaurs glided with wings of flesh. Sharks traced paths older than coral itself. Yet among these titans, this small soft serpent found its own kingdom, a kingdom of quietness. It swam where giants could not, lived where currents were too gentle for teeth. It thrived not by force but by grace. As the Cretaceous drew closer to its end, climates shifted once more. The Tethys began to close, its lagoons turning shallow and hot. Coral reefs whitened, shorelines receded. The sea that had given birth to Eupodophis slowly retreated, leaving its children behind. But what it taught them endured. When the final waves withdrew, snakes were ready for the next world, the world of roots, soil and silence. In a sense, Eupodophis never truly died. Its design lived on, refined and simplified, in every serpent that learned to coil and strike, to hide and listen. The elegance of its motion, the stillness before movement, the quiet assurance of its form, all were inherited, refined, perfected. The Tethys Sea vanished. but the way it taught creatures to flow never disappeared. Every snake that moves through grass today carries in its rhythm the memory of that vanished ocean. The fossil remains of Eupodophius descuensi rest now in a museum in Paris. Under controlled light, its bones gleam faintly against limestone older than most continents. Visitors pass by without knowing that they are looking at a hinge in time, a bridge between land and sea, between what crawled and what swam, between memory and possibility. The air in the gallery feels heavy, as though the sea still clings to it, refusing to leave. If one stands long enough before that fossil, it begins to feel as if the stone hums. Not a sound you can hear, but a vibration beneath perception, a resonance of water, of movement, of patience. It is the hum of everything that once flowed. And in that moment, the difference between past and present, between death and endurance, collapses. The snake in the stone is still swimming. Perhaps that is why we find such peace in these ancient stories. They remind us that even in endings there is motion. Even in sadness there is continuity. The earth is never still, and neither are we. The limbs we lose, the forms we abandon, the paths we forget, they all remain somewhere, folded into the body of time, waiting to be remembered. Eupodopis was not a final version of anything. It was an experiment, a sketch, a graceful hesitation before the leap into what snakes would become. Yet in that hesitation lies all the wonder of existence. To be caught mid-transformation is to be alive in the truest sense, to hold the past and the future in the same breath, and to let neither go. And so, as the sea withdrew, as light dimmed and ages passed, the body of Eupodopis lay still, its shape pressed into stone like a sea turned eternal. But the idea of it, the fluidity, the grace, the quiet courage to change, did not vanish. It seeped into the marrow of the world, into every living thing that moves with rhythm instead of force. When you look at a snake gliding through leaves, or through sand, or water shimmering in a summer night, you are seeing not just motion but memory, the lingering dream of a creature that once swam through the last warm breath of the Tethys Sea. The sea is gone now. The coral is dust. The limestone cliffs of Lebanon stand dry under an indifferent sun. But deep inside the earth, where time folds upon itself, Eupodopis still moves, forever choosing motion over structure, flow over form, surrender over struggle. The earth, if you listen closely, is still telling its story. And sometimes, in the long pause between waves, you can almost hear the quiet rhythm of that ancient experiment, the sound of a serpent learning how to dance. There are fossils that speak of movement, and there are fossils that speak of stillness. Deinonychia patagonica was both. It lived not in the brightness of the Cretaceous sky, nor in the shimmer of the Tethys lagoons, but in the dim underworld of roots and soil. If Eupodopis was a dancer in the water's light, Deinonychia was a priest of the earth, heavy, patient, powerful, and silent. The world it knew was already old. The air of South America was thick with dust and pollen, its forests dense with cycads and primitive flowers. On the surface, dinosaurs still ruled, their calls echoing across the plains. The thunder of their steps shook the ground, a rhythm that Deinonychia would come to know intimately. Because while others looked to the sky or the sea, it turned inward, to the hidden chambers beneath the soil, where sound becomes vibration and time slows to a crawl. When its fossils were uncovered in Patagonia, paleontologists found something extraordinary. A skull built not for light, but for listening. Its bones were wide, its structure dense, its inner ear large and sensitive, perfectly shaped to sense vibrations through the earth. Modern snakes do this too. When you walk across sand or stone, they feel your steps long before they see you. That sense began here, in the skull of Deinonychia patagonica, nearly 70 million years ago. It was long, perhaps 2 meters from head to tail, its body thick and muscular, its scales coarse like the texture of dry leaves. It did not swim or climb, it tunneled. It moved through the ground like smoke through cloth, slowly, persistently creating its own corridors of silence. Where light could not follow, Deinonychia became sovereign. It was not built for speed or show, but for the art of waiting. Its prey were small mammals, lizards, eggs, perhaps even the young of dinosaurs that nested too close to the earth. When it hunted, it did not chase, it listened, it waited for the faint pulse of movement above. the tremor of feet, the rustle of something unaware. The earth transmitted every sound like a whisper, and Deinonychia heard them all. Then, in a blur, it struck upward, breaking through soil in a motion so sudden it might have been mistaken for the earth itself exhaling. There is something sacred in that kind of stillness. While the world above blazed with colour and noise, Deinonychia mastered the dark. It turned quiet into strength, pressure into perception. Its burrow was not a prison but a temple, a place where sound became shape and shape became life. Some scientists have called it the architect of silence. They are not wrong. In the skull of Deinonychia lies the origin of the sensory system that defines every snake today. The way serpents perceive the world, not through sight or sound but through vibration, began here. To them, the world is not made of colour but of rhythm. A footstep is a pulse, a heartbeat is a tremor. The earth itself is language. When the fossil was studied, CT scans revealed something haunting. The shape of its inner ear matched almost perfectly that of modern burrowing snakes. It was as if time had skipped forward without erasing the design. Evolution had found something perfect and decided to keep it. That sense of vibration, that communion with the ground, became the inheritance of all future serpents. Every cobra that feels the quake of its prey, every python that strikes at the faintest disturbance in the dark, they all carry the echo of Deinonychia's skull. But to imagine Deinonychia only as a predator is to miss its deeper meaning. It was also a witness. It saw, or rather felt, the end of an age, when the skies began to fill with dust and the world darkened after the impact that would kill the dinosaurs. Creatures that lived beneath the ground were the ones that survived. When the sun disappeared, Deinonychia was already home in the dark. It did not fear night, because night was its nature. Long before the asteroid, the earth had already begun to tremble with change. Temperatures shifted, forests thinned, the great rivers of Gondwana turned to mud, but beneath all that Deinonychia moved unchanged, coiling through its labyrinth of roots. It may have felt the first distant thunder of the impact, the deep roll of catastrophe that shook mountains. It may have curled tighter, sensing what was to come, and when fire rained from the sky, it was safe buried in its world of silence. Perhaps that is the secret of the snake's survival, not speed, not cunning, not venom, but patience, the art of waiting, the wisdom of the earth itself. When the age of giants ended, those who could wait endured, those who could hear the world even without seeing it lived on. Deinonychia was among the first of those quiet heirs. Its name carries an echo of that endurance. Deinonychia patagonica, the Patagonian snake of the dinosaurs. It lived alongside them, yet belonged to what would come after. In it, we can see the blueprint for a future that did not yet exist. The world of mammals, birds, and men would rise on the bones of those who vanished. But beneath that new dawn, serpents would already be waiting, older, quieter, wiser. The soil of Patagonia, where Deinonychia's fossils were found, is rich in contrasts. Red cliffs meet pale sand and fossilized roots snake through layers of rock. It is as if the landscape itself remembers what moved through it. In some places, the ground still hums faintly when wind passes over it, a ghost vibration, the echoes of a serpent long gone. When paleontologists uncovered the skull, they realized they were holding a turning point in evolution. Here was a creature that could no longer walk, that did not swim, that chose the earth as its companion. It was the opposite of Eupodopus in every sense. One learned to surrender to the sea, the other to the soil. But both shared the same truth. Survival belongs to those who adapt to silence. In a world ruled by noise, Deinonychia was an act of defiance. Its existence proved that there is power in stillness, that the unseen can outlast the spectacular. Its body, thick and patient, moved through the dark without fear. It trusted the world it could not see, and in that trust lay immortality. Perhaps it is poetic justice that snakes, creatures so often feared for their hidden nature, descend from a being that lived entirely unseen. We imagine danger in what we cannot see, but for Deinonychia, invisibility was salvation. It survived not because it fought, but because it listened. When the fossil was first described in the 1920s, the scientific community barely noticed. It was only later, with new technology, that its significance emerged. The shape of its inner ear, the size of its skull, the orientation of its bones, All told a story of adaptation so subtle it took millions of years to perfect. The Cretaceous was a theatre of monsters, but Deinonychia belonged to a different performance, one that could only be felt, not seen. Its hunting grounds were the spaces between roots, the burrows abandoned by other creatures, the soil beneath fallen trees. There, in the half-light, it glided through tunnels of its own making. The smell of wet earth, the pulse of worms, the rustle of buried leaves. These were its world. It never saw the stars, but it knew the heartbeat of the planet. It lived in communion with the slow breathing of the earth itself. Modern snakes still bear that communion. When a python wraps itself around prey, it feels the heartbeat through its coils. When a desert viper senses footsteps in the sand, it responds not to sound but to vibration. When a grass snake slides through soil, it echoes the motion that Deinonychia perfected. The lineage of listening continued, unbroken across 70 million years. To imagine its last moments is to feel the weight of deep time. Perhaps one day the tunnels collapsed. Perhaps rising waters filled them with silt. Perhaps the air changed and the ground grew too heavy to breathe. But even in death, Deinonychia remained embraced by its element. The soil that once hid it now preserved it. Each grain pressed into its bones until fossil and earth became indistinguishable. The snake beneath the earth returned fully to the earth. What it left behind is more than evidence. It left philosophy. It taught us that evolution is not just the story of rising toward light, but of returning to darkness with grace. That to survive is not always to conquer, but sometimes to hide, to listen, to yield. When night falls in the Patagonian desert, the air cools and the sand hardens. The stars emerge, indifferent and infinite. Beneath them the ground sleeps, and somewhere far below the bones of Deinonychia rest, still surrounded by silence. Yet that silence is alive. It hums faintly, as if remembering the sound of something moving softly through it. A vibration, ancient and familiar. The pulse of a creature that once taught the world to hear. Deinonychia patagonica was not a monster, nor a relic, nor an accident. It was the earth learning to move within itself. It was patience made flesh, vibration made form. And in that patient form lies the secret of endurance, because in every snake that slides through soil today, every serpent that rests coiled in darkness, the lesson of Deinonychia endures. To survive, one must learn to listen to the earth. To last, one must learn to love silence. And so, beneath the deserts of Patagonia, under mountains of redstone and time, the snake that heard the world still waits, its story vibrating softly, endlessly, in the quiet heart of the planet. When the dust of the dinosaurs began to settle, and the age of monsters neared its quiet twilight, a new dynasty slithered from the warm soils of Gondwana. They were not the small, furtive snakes of forest burrows or coral lagoons. They were something else, something colossal, deliberate, and ancient beyond measure. The Matsuidai were the empire of shadows, the silent inheritors of a dying world. Their dominion stretched across continents that had once been one, from the steaming jungles of Madagascar to the river plains of India, from the red deserts of Africa to the humid valleys of South America. The Matsoids reigned for tens of millions of years. Fossils of their kind have been unearthed across this vast territory, scattered like fragments of a long-forgotten epic. Each tells a part of the same story, of snakes that grew beyond imagination, creatures that moved not as predators of opportunity, but as embodiments of the Earth's patience. The world they ruled was a world in transition. The continents were drifting towards the shapes we know now. The dinosaurs that once shook the ground were vanishing, their bones sinking into the mud of the Cretaceous dusk. Mammals were beginning their quiet rise, birds found new skies, and the forest pulsed with a slow, humid rebirth. In this threshold between worlds, the Matsoids appeared, great coiled rivers of muscle and silence. Wanambi naracortensis in Australia, Matsoya bai in Argentina, Gigantophis garstini in Egypt, all members of the same dynasty, each adapted to its own kingdom of heat and stillness. Some stretched beyond 10 meters, thick as tree trunks, heavy as nightmares. To see one in motion would have been to watch the earth itself breathe. They glided not with the nervous quickness of smaller serpents, but with the deliberate calm of something that feared nothing. Their strength was not in venom. They did not need it. They killed by patience and pressure, the slow orchestration of muscle and time. Crocodiles, young dinosaurs, giant birds, all could fall beneath their embrace. They were the sculptors of silence in a world still reeling from catastrophe. If you could stand in the Cretaceous wetlands of northern Africa, you might see one at dusk, half submerged in reeds, the surface of the water trembling as it exhaled. The air would shimmer with heat. Dragonflies would buzz lazily above the swamps. The horizon would bleed gold into violet. And in that stillness, you might mistake the curve of its body for a fallen tree, until the tree began to move. Its scales caught the last light of the sun like bronze shields. Each ripple of muscle sent a small wave through the water. When it struck, there was no sound, only the brief convulsion of prey and the so inevitable tightening of coils. In that moment, the Madtsoid embodied everything that evolution had learned from millions of years of practice: precision, restraint, inevitability. The empire they built was not one of conquest, but of adaptation. These snakes occupied niches left empty by the giants who had perished. They filled the ecological void with elegance, not aggression. Where tyrannosaurs once ruled, now came the whisper of scales through ferns. Where raptors once hunted, now came the shimmer of a serpent's passage through the undergrowth. The world had changed masters, and the new rulers carried no banners, spoke no language, left no monuments, only trails in dust and echoes in the bones of those they consumed. In India, their fossils lie among layers of volcanic ash, remnants of eruptions that once blackened the sky. In South America, they sleep beneath red cliffs carved by wind. In Madagascar, the bones of their kind rest in riverbeds that still flood with monsoon rains. Each fossil is a pulse frozen in time, a record of strength born from silence. The most famous among them, Gigantophis garstini, was discovered in the Fayum Depression of Egypt, a desert that was once a lush tropical swamp. It was estimated to have reached lengths of up to 12 meters, longer than a bus, heavier than an elephant's heart. Its vertebrae were massive, curved in a way that suggested not just size, but grace. Despite its enormity, its design was elegant, precise. It could move through water with the same effortless glide as its smaller ancestors, coiling and uncoiling like liquid shadow. Some scientists believe Gigantophis hunted the early elephants of its time, primitive proboscideans that wandered the wetlands. Others think it fed on large reptiles or crocodilians. But perhaps the truth is simpler. It ruled not by what it ate, but by what it represented. It was the physical memory of an age when reptiles had ruled unchallenged, a last silent echo of the grandeur that the asteroid could not erase. Its cousins, Madtsoia bai and Madtsoia madagascariensis, extended that legacy. They lived through the mass extinction, survived into the Paleocene, and watched the rise of mammals. For millions of years after the dinosaurs vanished, these snakes remained, ghosts of a former empire coexisting with the small trembling beginnings of a new world. To imagine their reign is to imagine a landscape filled with paradoxes. The forests were young again, full of new life, yet haunted by the memory of giants. The air was quieter, the nights longer. Mammals scurried under leaves, their hearts beating fast in the dark, while above them the serpents moved with the confidence of gods who had seen world's end and did not fear another dawn. Their empire was boundless, yet invisible. No kingdom marked their rule, no fossil bears their banner. Their dominion existed in the invisible territories of fear and awe. They ruled not by presence, but by the certainty that they could be anywhere. The earth itself was their palace, its rivers their corridors, its caves their halls, and yet, like all empires, theirs too began to fade. As the continents drifted apart, climates changed. The lush wetlands dried, forests gave way to savannas, and the air cooled. The very world that had birthed the Madtsoids began to withdraw its favour. Gigantism, once a gift, became a burden. Their enormous bodies, designed for heat and abundance, struggled in a world growing lean and cold. Still, they endured. Fossils of Madtsoids appear as late as the Pleistocene, snakes that outlived epochs, refusing extinction like old gods who have forgotten how to die. They persisted even as the first humans walked the earth. Imagine it, a world where the shadow of Gigantophis might still linger, where in some humid valley an ancient serpent coiled beneath roots older than history, indifferent to the noise of new civilizations. There are stories in Madagascar of snakes that swallowed cattle whole, of rivers that moved when no wind blew. In the mythology of early peoples, serpents were always more than animals. They were symbols of eternity, of the cycle that devours itself to be reborn. Perhaps those myths are not coincidence, but memory, the faint cultural echo of a time when serpents ruled the world. In every culture that touched their descendants, snakes became metaphors for time. The Ouroboros, the serpent eating its own tail, is the shape of endlessness. It is also the truth of evolution itself, each age consuming the last to create the next. The Madsueids were that symbol made flesh. Their bodies were loops of history, coiling through extinction and survival, erasing the line between the two. When their fossils are studied now, paleontologists often note how little modern snakes have changed in design. The vertebrae of a python or boa still carry the same mechanical poetry, the same interlocking joints, the same efficiency of motion. The difference is only in scale. The empire may have fallen, but its architecture endures. To stand before a Madsueid vertebrae in a museum is to feel both awe and calm. It is massive but not monstrous. It speaks not of terror but of inevitability. You realize that the earth has always preferred the patient over the proud. Every Madsueid was a sermon in stillness, a reminder that the most powerful things do not rush. The silence they left behind was not emptiness but continuation. When they vanished, their lineage gave rise to others, the boas, the pythons, the anacondas. In the steaming jungles of the Paleocene, one descendant rose to reclaim their grandeur. Titanoboa ceragenensis, 45 feet long, the largest snake that ever lived. In it, the empire of the Madsueids found its afterlife. And so their story did not end with extinction, but with transformation. The earth recycles its myths. What dies in one form returns in another. The serpents of Gondwana became the serpents of the tropics, their lineage stretching like a thread through the fabric of time. When you trace that thread backward, from modern snakes, through boas and pythons, through Titanoboa, through the ancient bones of Gigantophis, it leads to the same origin, a world of warmth, silence, and patience. The empire of the Madsueids may be gone, but the philosophy that built it remains carved into the rhythm of every living serpent. Move quietly, endure change, and never stop listening to the earth. At sunset in Patagonia, where Matsoya Bay once coiled among river reeds, the air still trembles faintly when the wind moves. It is a low hum, barely there, like the whisper of scales on sand. Some say it is the voice of the earth remembering its giants. Perhaps it is nothing more than the shifting of air through stone, the echo of ancient hollows. But perhaps, if you stand long enough, you will feel it. A vibration deep beneath your feet, patient, endless. For the Madsueids were not truly buried. They became the pulse of the planet itself, the slow rhythm of continuity. Their bodies turned to fossils, their fossils to dust, and that dust settled back into the ground that gave them birth. And when rain falls on that ground, the water that seeps through stone carries their story still, a story of power without violence, of rule without noise, of empire without walls. Every snake that glides today is a survivor of their kingdom, a whisper of their sovereignty. They are the shadows that never vanished, the rivers that never dried. Their empire was built not to last in form, but to last in motion. And if you listen closely, beneath the wind, beneath the hum of insects, beneath the silence, you might hear it still. The steady, ancient breathing of the Madsueids, the empire of the earth, coiled forever beneath your feet. There are moments in the fossil record when time seems to stop. Not just a skeleton, not just a trace, but a scene. A single instant, sealed in stone as if the earth itself could not bear to forget. The story of Sanager indicus is one of those moments. In the dry heart of what is now Western India, paleontologists once brushed away the red dust of the Cretaceous and uncovered a tableau both intimate and terrible. Curled around a cluster of eggs lay the fossilized remains of a small snake. Its body formed a loop, its jaw open, in eternal motion, its ribs pressed against something delicate. Within its coil lay a baby dinosaur, its skull small, unfinished, fragile as a bird's. The snake's fangs were locked against its head. In that instant, both predator and prey had been buried alive, frozen by chance into a portrait of hunger. The name given to that serpent was Sanager indicus, the ancient gape. It lived nearly 70 million years ago, in the tropical plains of India. When the subcontinent was still drifting northward through the Tethys Sea, the land was lush, fertile, alive with fern groves and nesting giants. Titanosaurs, the long-necked herbivores that dwarfed the trees, laid their eggs in shallow pits, each no larger than a football, each a promise of life that would never see the sky. Around those nests, smaller creatures prowled, scavengers and opportunists, living in the shadows of giants. Among them moved Serenity, long and slender, its scales dusted with the ochre of the earth, its hunger ancient and familiar. It was not large, perhaps 3.5 meters at most, but in its world size meant nothing. What mattered was the art of patience. Serenity was a master of waiting. It would curl near the nests of titanosaur mothers after they were left to graze, its body disguised among dry leaves and cracked earth. For days, sometimes weeks, it would lie still, its tongue flicking to taste the faint scent of egg yolk seeping through the thin shell. When the moment came, when the first hatchlings cracked the surface and the air trembled with the tiny panicked heartbeats of new life, it struck. Its skull was built for it. Broad, flexible, hinged with a primitive gape that could open wider than most reptiles of its time. It was evolution's rehearsal for what snakes would later perfect, the ability to swallow prey whole. Yet Serenity was still early in that script. Its jaws stretched only so far. It could not consume the giants of its world, only their beginnings. And so it waited by the future itself, coiled around innocence, feeding on what was meant to replace it. The fossil captures that contradiction perfectly. The baby dinosaur's head half inside the snake's mouth tells a story not of malice but of necessity. In the quiet violence of prehistory, hunger was the only truth. The titanosaur hatchling never had a chance to see its mother. The snake never had a chance to finish its meal. A flash flood buried them both, encasing the struggle in mud that hardened into eternity. 68 million years later, when the rock was split open, that struggle returned to light, an echo of a heartbeat, a snapshot of life's relentless circle. What makes Serenity so haunting is not the act itself, but what it represents. For the first time, we see a predator that is recognizably snake-like, acting as snakes do today, ambushing, swallowing, coiling around what it desires. In this one fossil, the blueprint of all future serpents is written in exquisite detail. The body curved for constriction, the skull stretched for devouring, the patience of the earth itself embodied in a single pose. To imagine that scene alive is to step into a world heavy with heat and sound. Picture the Cretaceous plains of Gujarat, the air thick with moisture, dragonflies drifting in clouds, the smell of resin and decay rising from the ground. Titanosaurs moved in slow procession, their footsteps shaking the soil. Each one weighed as much as 20 elephants. Their tails cracked like whips, their shadow stretching across the grasslands. When they nested, they gathered in herds, laying hundreds of eggs in circular pits, each a fragile world of its own. And while they wandered away to feed, the scavengers came, birds, mammals, lizards, and snakes, drawn by the scent of possibility. Among them, Serenity waited, its scales blending with dust, its eyes bright slits of patience. To see it move was to see silence given form. It did not chase, did not roar, simply existed, perfectly tuned to the rhythm of hunger and stillness. When the eggs began to hatch, the air filled with small cries. Tiny sauropods emerged, their limbs weak, their necks trembling under the weight of new breath. Some struggled free, others faltered. And in that fragile chaos, Serenity struck. Its movement was sudden but precise, a ripple of muscle, a widening of jaws, a momentary gleam of wet fangs. The baby's cry ended before it reached the trees. It was a scene repeated countless times across millions of years. For every giant that walked the earth, there was something smaller waiting in shadow, reminding the world that no life is too great to be consumed. This is the balance that evolution writes into every chapter, the eternal symmetry of predator and prey. Serenity was not cruel, it was the necessary half of creation. By feeding on the young, it controlled the numbers of the giants. By dying in the flood, it fed the soil that would one day turn to stone and cradle its own fossil. It was part of the same circle that every creature inherits. To live is to consume, to be consumed, and to leave behind the shape of that hunger in the bones of the earth. Its name, the ancient gape, is almost poetic. It suggests not savagery but openness, the mouth as an instrument of survival and evolution. That gape would evolve further in time, giving rise to the dislocating jaws of boas and pythons, to the precision strikes of vipers, to the silent, seamless swallow of modern serpents. Every snake that unhinges its jaw today owes its mechanics to Sanajay. It was the first to try, the prototype of a hunger that could reshape itself to fit the world. When the fossil was first displayed, visitors often stared in silence. There was something unsettling about it, something too human in its frozen intimacy. The baby's curved neck, the snake's open jaw, they seemed to tell a story not of violence, but of inevitability. In that still tableau, the entire Cretaceous world seemed distilled into a single gesture: the act of taking, the act of being taken. Beyond India, other fossils whisper of similar scenes, though none so vividly preserved. In South America, traces of snakes found near nests of small dinosaurs suggest that this behaviour was not unique. Across continents, the same rhythm pulsed, life feeding on the future, the present devouring the promise of tomorrow. It is a pattern that never ceased. If one could walk among those nesting grounds, one would see more than just death. There would be warmth, the smell of wet soil, the soft rustle of leaves. The mothers would return, nudging the shells with care, their massive bodies moving with surprising gentleness. Life was tender even then, just as it was brutal. The Cretaceous was not merely an age of terror, it was an age of balance, where beauty and hunger intertwined like vines. As darkness fell, the landscape would change, the heat would fade, the air heavy with mist. Fireflies would emerge, their glow flickering across the nests like scattered embers. And somewhere in that dim light, Sanajay would move again, quiet as breath, its body tracing the same looping pattern that evolution would repeat forever. When the flood came, the one that sealed its fate, it came suddenly. Torrential rains fell across the plains, washing silt and clay into every hollow. The nests filled first, drowning the eggs and hatchlings. Sania, coiled around its meal, may have lifted its head briefly, sensing the vibration of approaching death. But there was nowhere to go. The water came fast, thick, and choking. Within minutes, predator and prey were buried together, their struggle halted mid-motion, their final breath captured in the mud. And so they remained, untouched, for 68 million years. When the stone was split, the image was perfect, so perfect it felt deliberate. The fossil became a mirror, reflecting not just the snake's story, but ours. We too are creatures of hunger and time, forever consuming what we love, forever caught between need and tenderness. In that sense, Sanajay is not merely a prehistoric curiosity. It is a lesson in humility. It reminds us that even the mightiest begin as fragile things, and even the smallest can alter the fate of giants. It shows us that history is not written by those who roar, but by those who endure. Today the plains of Gujarat are dry and quiet. The titanosaur nests lie fossilized in red rock, their circular pits filled with echoes. Farmers walk above them, their footsteps tracing the same paths where dinosaurs once nested and snakes once waited. The monsoon rains still come, washing over the ancient ground, seeping through the layers where Sanajay sleeps. The water carries fragments of its dust downstream, spreading its story grain by grain into the rivers of modern India. If you stand there at dusk, when the air hums with heat and cicadas sing, you can almost imagine the scene coming alive again. The ground trembling with the footsteps of titans, the rustle of small lives beneath them, and in the stillness between, the quiet patience of a serpent waiting for the heartbeat of the world. Sanajay indicus was not the largest, nor the fiercest, nor the most beautiful of its kind, but it was a prophet of the serpent's destiny. It was proof that even as the age of dinosaurs neared its end, the lineage of silence, patience, and motion was already rising. The serpent did not inherit the earth by force. It inherited it by listening, by enduring, by coiling in the shadows while the giants fell. In every modern snake, from the python of India to the anaconda of the Amazon, there is a fragment of Sanajay's design, a widening jaw, a still gaze, a hunger that waits instead of chases. Each carries within its bones the memory of that single moment sealed in stone, the ancient gape, the final flood, the circle of life frozen forever in red dust. The prey of the Cretaceous are long gone, but the hunger that shaped them endures. It is the pulse beneath the soil, the rhythm that drives every living thing, to feed, to be fed, to return to earth. It is the law that no extinction can erase, and so the fossil of Sanajay remains, not as a relic of death, but as a monument to continuity. Two creatures, locked together in their final instant, preserved not as enemies but as equals, each completing the other, each proving that even in the last breath life is a conversation, and the Earth remembers every word. There are moments in the planet's memory that no wind can erase, no tide can wash away. The end of the Cretaceous was one of them, an ending so violent, so absolute that even stone remembers it. 66 million years ago, the sky itself turned against the Earth. The day began like any other in that ancient world. The air was heavy with warmth, forests alive with the cries of birds that were not yet birds, rivers swollen with life. Titanosaurs moved slowly through ferns that brushed their bellies, the ground trembling beneath each step. Pterosaurs circled high, wings flashing silver in the morning light. Beneath the soil, in burrows and roots, snakes like Deinonychia rested in coils of silence. There was no warning, only stillness, as though the planet had drawn a long breath before screaming. Far above, in the cold vacuum beyond the clouds, a stone the size of a mountain tore through space. It had travelled for millions of years, indifferent, ancient, nameless. When it reached the edge of Earth's atmosphere, it was moving faster than any sound could carry, 20 kilometres a second. A bullet of iron and dust aimed by chance. The air could not move aside quickly enough. Friction ignited it, wrapped it in flame, and then, in one heartbeat, it fell. The impact came near the coast of what is now Mexico, the Chicxulub crater, a scar 150 kilometers wide, carved into the Yucatan Peninsula. The energy released was more than 1 billion times that of any bomb humanity would ever create. Mountains evaporated. The sea rose in walls of fire. Shockwaves raced around the world in less than an hour. Forests ignited thousands of miles away. Every living thing that breathed surface air felt the heat of that instant. Those who were there, the last of the great dinosaurs, the birds, the mammals, the snakes, the trees, did not see the meteor. They only saw the flash. Noon turned to sunrise and then to something beyond light. For a few seconds, the world was brighter than the heart of the sun. Shadows vanished, skies bled white, and then came the sound. It arrived long after sight had gone, a sound too vast to be heard, a pressure that tore through lungs and soil and bone. The wind followed, winds that could peel the flesh from anything standing. Trees were pulled from their roots and hurled like arrows. Oceans boiled where the shockwave met them. The air itself caught fire. But the true death did not come that day. It came after. When the molten stones stopped falling and the first silence returned, the planet began to suffocate. Soot filled the skies, a black veil drawn across the sun. For months, then years, daylight never fully returned. The temperature plunged, photosynthesis ceased, plants withered in the dark, and those that ate them followed. The ocean turned acidic as rain mixed with sulphur and ash. The rivers ran thick with the bodies of creatures that had drowned, burned, or simply starved. More than 70% of all species vanished. The great lords of the land, Triceratops, Ankylosaurus, the tyrants of tooth and bone, fell without ceremony. Their bones cooled under the ash. The sea giants too, mosasaurs, ammonites, the luminous rulers of the deep, faded into silence. The world that had roared for millions of years fell still. Yet somewhere beneath the surface, in the cold patience of the earth, something lived. Snakes had no temples, no cities, no sky. But they had the soil, and that was enough. In burrows left by other creatures, in the cracks of dried riverbeds, in the hollows of fallen trees, they waited. They curled themselves into knots of endurance, their hearts slowing to the rhythm of the dying planet. They did not need the sun, they did not need much at all. Their bodies were efficient engines of stillness, warm-blooded enough to move, cold-blooded enough to endure. While the beasts above starved, the snakes survived on what remained: insects, carcasses, eggs, whatever the ashes gave them. They listened to the tremors of extinction and did not move. For centuries, perhaps thousands of years, the earth remained dark. Seasons lost their meaning. Rain fell in black sheets. Volcanoes erupted in morning. It was not night or day anymore, but something between. A twilight stretched over the entire planet. The forests burned until there was nothing left to burn, then froze where they stood. And through it all, the snakes persisted. In the fossil record, their bones become rarer in that time, but they never disappear. They were small, thin, almost fragile. But in them lay the blueprint of survival. They could go months without food. They could hide in cracks too narrow for claws. They could shed their skin when the world grew too heavy. When others sought glory, they sought shelter, and that difference saved them. Perhaps Deinonychia was among them, its descendants digging deeper as the surface burned. Perhaps the lineages of Najash, Pachyrachis, and Sanajay had already passed their lessons forward, to move in silence, to endure hunger, to trust the dark. When the meteor fell, those who had learned those lessons lived. Those who had not, did not. There is a strange peace in imagining that world, a planet stripped bare, its forests gone, its seas poisoned, its mountains buried under ash. And yet beneath it all, life breathing still. The soil itself would have pulsed faintly with movement, the last embers of evolution glowing underground. Above, the sky remained a wound. The sun was only a rumour. The moon hung unseen behind clouds of soot. The air was heavy, dense, silent. Even the wind seemed afraid to move. It must have been centuries before the first rays of light returned. Slowly the black faded to grey. Slowly plants began to breathe again. Moss returned before trees, algae before forests. In that slow resurrection, the snakes emerged once more. They crawled out from under stones slick with ash. They uncoiled from the hollow bones of what had been dinosaurs. They tasted the air, thin, strange, but alive. The earth was new now, quieter, emptier, waiting to be filled. In that emptiness, snakes found their kingdom. Their small size was their strength. Where giants had perished, they thrived in the ruins. The soil was theirs, the crevices theirs, the carcasses theirs. Insects multiplied in the warmth of decay, and the serpents followed, silent scavengers of a fallen age. Each movement was slow, cautious, reverent, as though they knew the ground they crossed was sacred, the grave of the world that came before. The fossil record tells us that within a few million years, snakes had spread again. They adapted to forests reborn, to rivers reborn, to climates reborn. From the ashes of Chicxulub came the ancestors of all modern serpents, pythons, vipers, cobras, boas, and countless others. Extinction had not ended them, it had refined them. The age of reptiles was not over, it had only changed form. In the silence after fire, the earth whispered a new rhythm, softer and steadier. No longer the thunder of dinosaurs, no longer the crash of titans, but the hush of something smaller, more deliberate. Evolution had learned a lesson in humility. The serpent, patient and low, became the perfect vessel for that lesson. What is remarkable is not that snakes survived, but that they remembered. In their senses, in their bones, in the very way they move, they carry the echo of catastrophe. They still hide when the air trembles. They still coil when light flashes. They still shed their skin as if to discard the memory of that burning sky. Every snake alive today is a survivor's song, a hymn to what endured when everything else died. If one could stand in the aftermath, in that first dawn after the darkness, the sight would have been almost unbearable. The sun would have risen pale and red through veils of dust. The ground would still smoke in places, the air would taste of iron and rain, and in that silence the only movement would have been the slow glide of something slender, ancient and eternal, a snake tracing its path through the ashes. Around it lay the bones of giants, ribs like arches, skulls like ruined temples, spines collapsed into mosaics of extinction. The serpent passed between them, indifferent, undisturbed, the living thread connecting what was dead to what would live again. The earth, in its grief, seemed to breathe through it. There is a theory among paleontologists that snakes diversified precisely because of the extinction. With the dinosaurs gone, ecological niches opened. Rodents, birds, amphibians, all began to flourish. And the snakes, ever adaptable, followed. They became climbers, swimmers, burrowers, hunters. They spread across continents. What had begun as a lineage of survivors became an empire of inheritors. But this was not triumph, it was continuity. The snakes did not celebrate the end of the Cretaceous, they carried it within them. They were the custodians of memory, the living fossils of endurance. In their silence was the echo of that final day, the day the sky fell and the world began again. Today, if you hold a handful of soil and close your eyes, you might feel a faint warmth that has nothing to do with sunlight. It is the warmth of the earth remembering its own survival, the warmth of all that did not vanish. The ground beneath your feet is the same ground that hid the serpents, that sheltered life while the heavens burned. Every grain of ash became dust, and every dust became rock, and every rock became the cradle of what came next. The meteor was not the end, it was the breath before a new beginning. When you see a snake today, gliding through grass or curling in stillness, you are looking at one of the few creatures that has witnessed every dawn since the last apocalypse. Its body is history made flesh, shaped by fire, perfected by patience. And though the world above has changed beyond recognition, cities, lights, engines, voices, beneath it all the rhythm remains. The earth still hums the song of those that hid, that waited, that endured. Because when the sky fell, they did not fall with it. They listened, they waited, and when the silence became unbearable, they emerged to remind the earth how to begin again. When the fire faded and the sky returned to blue, the earth awoke to an unfamiliar rhythm. The air was cooler, the forest smaller, the sounds gentler. Gone were the cries of the giants. In their place came whispers, the rustle of leaves, the drip of rain, the pulse of insects. Out of that quiet, new voices rose, delicate and tentative. Mammals ventured from the shadows where they had cowered for millions of years. Birds filled the hollow skies, and beneath them, in the soil still warm from catastrophe, the snakes began to move again. They were not the same as before. What had survived the apocalypse was not strength but adaptability, creatures that could hide, endure, and wait. The snakes of this reborn world were smaller, their bones refined by scarcity, their colours blending with the ash-grey earth. They carried in their blood the memory of the fire, but in their motion a new calm. As the Paleocene dawned, the continents were lush once more. The forests of South America returned first, dense, humid, shimmering with life. Ferns reclaimed the riverbanks, flowers bloomed again, unfamiliar to the eyes of any creature that had lived before. The snakes spread with the plants, following warmth, following prey, and there in the swamps of what would one day be Colombia, evolution wrote its answer to extinction. In the green dark of the Paleocene jungle, under trees heavy with moss and rain, a shape moved through the water. It was vast, silent, inevitable. Where it passed, the surface rippled as though the river itself were breathing. Fish scattered in flashes of silver. The air trembled with a low, steady rhythm, the rhythm of a creature too large to hide and too old to fear. It was Titanoboa carionensis, the heir of the ashes. 45 feet long, weighing over a ton, its body was thicker than a man's chest. It was the largest snake to ever live, a descendant of the survivors who had waited out the world's ending in darkness. Its size was not an accident. It was a testament. The warmth of the Paleocene, the greenhouse aftermath of the impact, allowed life to grow immense again. And in that warmth, the snakes remembered what it felt like to rule. The world Titanoboa knew was different from the one the dinosaurs had left behind. There were no tyrannosaurs, no horned herds, no winged lords above. The new empire was smaller, quieter, greener. Giant turtles paddled through the swamp. Crocodiles slid between reeds. Palms rose in dense thickets, their roots buried in black mud. In this theatre of humidity, Titanoboa was both predator and presence. Its movements were unhurried. It had no need to rush. It hunted not through chase but through patience, the same patience that had preserved its ancestors beneath the ashes. When it struck without sound, one motion, one coil, one ending. Its prey were crocodilians, and fish larger than most mammals. It would wait in ambush near riverbanks, half submerged, its body blending with the darkness of the water. The moment a ripple betrayed movement, it lunged, jaws opening wider than belief. Scientists who unearthed its fossils in the Cerrejón coal mines found vertebrae the size of dinner plates, ribs curved like sickles, and a skull built for crushing. The heat of that world had allowed its metabolism to reach impossible proportions. If the Earth had been only a few degrees cooler, such a creature could not have existed. The size of Titanoboa was the measure of the planet's fever, a living thermometer of the Paleocene. Yet for all its magnitude, there was grace in its design. Its spine, a masterpiece of architecture, allowed it to twist and coil with fluid precision, each vertebra interlocked with the next like the segments of a prayer bead chain. When it moved, it did not disturb the world, it reshaped it. The water parted gently, the trees leaned in the wind it made. Even silence seemed to bow. It is tempting to imagine it as a monster, a relic of terror from the age before mammals, but That would be a mistake. Titanoboa was not horror. It was inheritance. It was the echo of everything that had come before, the culmination of every snake that had learned to move unseen, to survive hunger, to wait for light. It was a creature not of destruction, but of persistence. In the humid heat of that Paleocene morning, when mist clung to the water and sunlight glimmered like melted gold through the canopy, Titanoboa would rise from the river. Drops of water would roll down its scales, steam rising where sunlight touched them. Around it the jungle would fall silent, as though the earth itself were holding its breath. For a moment the line between past and present would blur. The same motion that once slid through the swamps of Gondwana now rippled through the reborn forests of South America. The serpent had outlived everything. Even the crocodiles of that age bore witness. There are fossils that show their bones cracked, their skulls crushed in a pattern only constriction could produce. The marks of Titanoboa are unmistakable, loops of death, written in pressure. It was a slow violence, almost merciful in its certainty. To be taken by such a creature was to return to the earth in the embrace of its oldest rhythm. Yet even empires born from ashes must end. The world cooled. The greenhouse air began to thin. Mountains rose, diverting rivers, changing currents. The forests retreated. The climate gentled. Titanoboa, whose life depended on warmth, began to fade. Its size, once a gift, became its undoing. As the temperatures dropped, it could no longer sustain its immense body. The same patience that had preserved its ancestors now could not save it. Slowly, the rivers it ruled grew colder, narrower. The last of its kind likely sank beneath the water one evening, its coils loosening, its shadow dissolving into mud. The jungle continued without it, indifferent but grateful. But Titanoboa was never truly gone. It left behind an idea, the memory of greatness reborn from ruin. It proved that even after the world had burned, life could rise again to its monumental form. Evolution does not mourn, it remembers. And in remembering it rebuilds. Every serpent that came after carried a fragment of that inheritance. The boas and pythons that slither through rainforests today, the anacondas that wait in South American rivers, all trace their lineage to Titanoboa. You can see it in their patience, their stillness, their reverence for water. You can feel it in the slow tightening of their coils, the calm certainty of their strike. They are smaller now, more cautious perhaps, but the soul of Titanoboa, the soul of endurance, still moves through them. In every age, life finds a way to echo its own past. The Paleocene was not the first rebirth, nor would it be the last. The earth is a patient artist, sculpting its own beauty from the ruins of itself. The serpents were its signature. When the forests burned, they hid. When the seas rose, they swam. When the rivers froze, they waited. And when the warmth returned, they unfurled like vines in sunlight. In the myths of future humans, serpents would become symbols of rebirth. The Ouroboros devouring its own tail, eternity made flesh. But long before humans dreamed of such symbols, the snakes had already lived them. Titanoboa was the living Ouroboros, the circle closed. It was born from the ashes of its ancestors, grew to unthinkable size, and vanished back into the soil that had given it form. Its story was not a tragedy, but a completion. In the quiet moments of modern rainforests, when mist curls over the water and the air hangs heavy with heat, there are places where locals say the river moves on its own. They speak of something ancient sleeping beneath the mud, something too large to belong to this age. Perhaps it is only the imagination of those who still listen to the jungle's heart. Or perhaps the earth, in its infinite patience, keeps some of its memories alive. Even now, deep beneath Colombia's Cerrejón Basin, the fossils of Titanoboa rest in seams of coal, a snake entombed in the remnants of an ancient forest. The coal itself is compressed vegetation from the world it ruled. The serpent sleeps inside the body of its own kingdom. Time has folded perfectly, as it always does. To look at its bones today is to look at the blueprint of survival, the geometry of resilience. The vertebrae curve like the script of an ancient language, one written not in ink but in endurance. Scientists measure, categorize, compare, but beneath all the data there is wonder. How could something so massive, so silent, emerge from extinction's shadow? How could life be so delicate and so stubborn at once? Perhaps Titanoboa was not meant to last. Perhaps its size was only a brief flare, a monument to what survival can create when the earth is generous. But even if its reign was short, its legacy was endless. Every creature that hides, that waits, that moves unseen through the dark, carries its lesson. The planet remembers through pattern, not permanence. And so, when you watch a small snake slide across a forest floor today, its tongue flicking, its scales catching the light, you are witnessing something older than mountains, older than the moon's reflection on the first sea. You are watching the same grace that once moved through a world remade by fire. The heirs of the ashes did not rebuild the past. They built something better, something that could bend, yield, and begin again. When the world ended, they hid. When the world returned, they emerged. And when the warmth came back, they grew. It was never vengeance, it was memory. The serpent had learned the greatest truth of all, that the earth always forgives those who wait. The night has fallen again. Not the night of extinction, not the black veil that smothered the Cretaceous, but a gentler one, the night we know, the air cools, the oceans breathe in rhythm, and the forests whisper. The world, reborn 1,000 times, has grown quiet. Yet beneath the surface, deeper than roots, deeper than memory, something ancient still moves. The earth does not sleep as we do. Its dreams are long and slow, measured in ages. Beneath its crust, between layers of limestone and coal, lie the remains of every story it has told. Najash, the walker with fading legs, Patirhachis and Hasiophis, the swimmers who learned to glide through salt. Eupodophis, the artist of hesitation. Dinalicia, the listener beneath the roots. Sanage, the hunter of innocence. The Matsuids, the patient emperors of heat. Titanoboa, the heir who returned from fire. All of them are there, woven together into the slow heartbeat of the planet. If you could lie down upon the earth and listen closely enough, you might hear it. Not a sound, but a vibration. A rhythm older than any name, older than blood, older even than light. It is the breath of everything that has lived and vanished, the exhalation of a planet that never truly forgets. Once, those serpents ruled. Once, they were the very shape of evolution's persistence. Now they are stories, buried beneath the weight of time, yet they have never truly gone. For every snake that slides through leaves tonight, for every flicker of scales beneath the moonlight, carries within it the echo of those ancestors, the ones who crawled before there were shadows, who survived when the sky fell, who learned that stillness could be stronger than fire. They were the architects of endurance, the quiet engineers of motion. When other creatures chased the sun, the snakes trusted the soil. When the air burned, they sought the roots. When life ended, they waited. That is why they are still here, coiled in the undergrowth, gliding through water, curling in the warmth of the human imagination. In their silence, there is truth. The truth that survival is not the triumph of the loud, but the patience of the humble. That power does not come from standing tall, but from knowing how to bend. That life, no matter how many times it is broken, always finds a way to breathe again. The fossil record is not a graveyard. It is a lullaby. Each bone hums softly of what once was, of the dust that became breath, and the breath that became dust again. The serpents of the Cretaceous did not vanish, they dissolved into the rhythm of the planet. They became the pulse that beats beneath our feet when the wind is still, and perhaps that is why we fear them, even now, not because they are predators, but because they remind us of what we cannot destroy. They are living proof that the world forgets nothing, that what buries itself deeply enough will one day rise again, reshaped, reimagined, reborn. Tonight, as you lie beneath your own ceiling of stars, imagine the earth beneath you, breathing. Imagine the heat below, the slow churning of continents, the whisper of stone against stone. Somewhere far beneath, among the veins of mineral and the rivers of molten light, the forms of those ancient serpents still rest, their bones glowing faintly with the warmth of time. They are not ghosts, they are continuity. The earth's slow exhalation. When the rain falls, it wakes them. When thunder rolls, they shift slightly, their memory stirring in the bedrock. Every tremor is a reminder, every echo a pulse, and in that rhythm, the planet dreams of what it once was, a garden of giants, a sea of silence, a world that learned to begin again through the patience of serpents. The Cretaceous is gone, but its heartbeat lingers. You can hear it in the hiss of wind through grass, in the sigh of waves against sand, in the slow, deliberate glide of a creature that has never needed legs to conquer distance. They move beneath us still, not in flesh, but in pattern, In every cycle of destruction and rebirth, they return, silent teachers of persistence. The world ends, the world begins, and somewhere between those two breaths, the serpent waits. So rest now. The earth is not alone in its dreaming. Close your eyes and feel the ancient warmth rising from the ground beneath you. The same warmth that cradled Najash, that rocked Dinalisia to sleep, that cooled the coils of Titanoboa as it sank beneath the Paleocene water. You are lying upon the oldest cradle there is, and beneath it, the serpents sleep. Curled in the dark, coiled in time, their hearts beating slowly in tune with the planet's own. If you listen long enough, you will hear them breathing with you. And if you dream of something moving softly in the dark, something vast, ancient and kind, do not be afraid. It is only the memory of the world that taught silence how to survive.